Good morning. Russell Raphael from North London Ulysses. Today I am going to continue my journey through James Joyce's Ulysses, and we're part way through analysing the Calypso chapter, a very important chapter. Not that they're not all important, but in Calypso we first meet Leopold Bloom, main protagonist in the book, dare one say the main hero. He is, after all, our Ulysses or Odysseus figure. We left Bloom in the pork butcher last time. He's gone in there because he would like to buy himself a kidney for breakfast. And the butcher is interesting in a number of respects. It's just round the corner from where Bloom lives. It's called Lugach. So in the Penguin, I'm around page 70 here. He halted before Lugach's window, spelt in quite a strange way. It's a strange sounding name and even stranger spelt. Dlugacz. Joyce has used this name because he had a friend in Trieste called Moses Lugach, and you might guess from that the person Lugach is a Jew. It's not specifically stated in the book, but we get the impression that he is also, like Bloom's father, an immigrant, a European immigrant. I think Lugach is more of a Polish name than a Hungarian name. And the irony is that his business is that of a pork butcher's. So one doesn't suppose he's a particularly kosher Jew, but a Jew nonetheless. And that might, I think that will play into some of the things that I need to go through today. So what I'll also do today, not quite now, but at some point in today's analysis, is to think why this episode is called Calypso, named after was she a goddess or a sort of a witch, or but anyway, something of that order, and she abducts Odysseus as he's trying to get home and keeps him prisoner for 7 years, the vast majority of his time trying to get back from the Trojan Wars is because he's held prisoner by Calypso, and he is sentenced to this terrible punishment, terrible ordeal, which is that he has to make love to her, with her, every single day. Poor thing. But somehow he's coped with this, and eventually Zeus sends another god or goddess and to Calypso and says, you need to free this man. So we will think, who is Calypso in our story? Why is this chapter? Why did Joyce suggest subsequently, post-publication, that it might be called Calypso? Anyway, for now, let's carry on with Bloom. He's in the butcher's. He's waiting to be served. And while he's waiting, he picks up, I mean, I'm calling it a leaflet, but I think that's to overindulge. It might also, it might be, you know how in butchers, or at least in old traditional butchers, they would have old newspapers lying there and they would use that to wrap things up. So it might be of that sort of thing. But anyway, he's picked up some sort of old bit of paper, whatever it might be, and it's about Lake Kinneret and Tiberius, and about a sort of model farm. There's reference to Moses Montefiore. Lake Kinneret is another name, the more Hebrew name for the Sea of Galilee. So we are in what we now know as Israel, but this is 1904. So we're in Zionist territory. The Israel was not established until 1948, but we seem to be looking at an early kibbutz, would be my guess. The kibbutzim, the sort of Marxist communal farms that were established. They weren't all Marxist, but most of them were, particularly in those days, where people would live together, work together, etc. And but also there to build up the state. So fairly controversial these days, but not in 1904, and not for much of the 20th century. So there's pictures of cattle on there, and that makes Bloom think of his job working for the cattle trader Joseph Cuff, and those mornings that he had in the cattle market, and with the beasts lowing in their pens, etc., etc. So Bloom was, what was he for Joseph Cuff? I think he was sort of an actuarian, that sort of thing. It was akin to a bookkeeper. Bloom has had various jobs, most of which he's been sacked from because he opens his mouth too much. But for a while, he worked for this cattle trader, Joseph Cuff. So he was in the, he knew his way around the slaughterhouse. We've already seen how Bloom is empathetic to animals. And this, so being involved in the cattle business, which involved their ultimate slaughter, was not something that appealed to him particularly, but it makes him think, as he looks at this picture with the cattle there, of that. It makes us also think about foot and mouth disease, the theme that has been referenced in the past 2 chapters, or even past 3 chapters, particularly in Nestor, chapter 2, and on a wider basis, what cattle might represent. You'll remember that back in Telemachus, we had that phrase, the silk of the kine. You remember when I was talking about the Shan van Vocht and the poor old woman, so being the sort of clandestine name for Ireland and the Irish. So let's just keep that in our back pocket for the moment, about how it might correspond to the Irish population. Right, let's move on. So Bloom is concerned. He's got this girl in front of him that's being served. He's stuck in the queue behind her, and there's only one kidney left. And this worries him that she is going to buy it. Fortunately, panic over, she doesn't. So she buys her sausages and she goes out, and he is now being served. But in his head, he's still thinking a bit about, not only about the kidney, but also he's still thinking about her hips. We're getting the impression that our Bloom is a bit of a lech. He's a little bit creepy. He realizes now that he looks at her properly, that she actually works next door. She's to give her the rather horrible name now, it sounds horrible, she is next door's slavey. The sort of female maid that does the odd jobs about the house, the cleaning, some of the food preparation, maybe cooking, that sort of thing. So it wasn't a very nice word, at least to our modern ears, but that was what they were called. And he thinks, because he now realizes she lives next door, he would quite like to follow her home. And so these hips that he's been thinking about, he could actually watch her all the way home, all the way down Eccles Street. But he'll get let down on that front because he doesn't get served quickly enough. So for the moment, he's just observing her, and she notices that she wears brown scapulars and that they are tattered. So what are scapulars? If you're Catholic, regular churchgoer, you may already know, but for those that aren't, we'll come across them more in the Lotus Eaters chapter. They're sort of ribbons that are worn around the neck, draped over the shoulders, and they have symbolic badges on them. and they are, and they show that would it be after your confirmation, you're sort of absorbed into a particular, not sect. That makes it sound, that's wrong, but a sort of club, particular type of Catholicism, so that you're not, even though Catholicism, its very name, that this sort of broad church, but to make it more accessible, you're in a particular niche of that church. Some are very much devoted to Mary. Some are devoted to other things. Is the Sacred Heart of Jesus one? I'm not sure. But anyway, she is in this one that is sort of got brown colours. He thinks about protecting her both ends. Religiously, is it also protecting her virginity? We're getting the impression that that Bloom thinks in a fairly low sort of way when it comes to sort of sexual matters and bodily matters. Anyway, he imagines her with a boyfriend that in his mind's eye is this policeman, and that maybe she's already lost her virginity. So all this stuff is running through his head, and interestingly, maybe it was at the same time Bloom is having these thoughts, while Stephen was very concerned on Sandymount Strand at the thoughts he was having, and that the thunder was on its way, he sees the cloud, and that it might punish him for having sexual thoughts. Bloom seems much more comfortable with it. Right, Bloom gets served, and then we've got over the page. Over the page, so that would make it on page 72. A speck of eager fire from Fox eyes thanked him. He withdrew his gaze after an instant. No, better not. Another time. So, what does that mean? Better not, another time. What's he talking about? Some sort of look takes place between Bloom and Lugach the pork butcher. And but commentaries have mentioned this, and most, I would say, Bloom is thinking about. Bloom's job is to sell advertising space in a newspaper, and some commentators have said, Bloom thinks, shall I sell him an advert or try and reel him in? And he thinks, no, better not, another time. I'm not so sure. I think it's something else altogether. And I have seen one commentator back me up on this. Can't remember who now. But we know that the butcher is another immigrant. Not a Hungarian immigrant. Just don't think it's a Hungarian. I think it's more of a Polish name. But he's probably of an age comparable. Well, we don't know his age. I imagine him to be older than Bloom, more Bloom's father's age, as he would have been, but maybe not. Maybe he's in. Let's put him in his 40s or 50s. Anyway, I'm pretty certain that he's supposed to be Jewish. He's got all the Zionist literature around his shop, and there's a look between this, let's call him a Polish immigrant, and the son of a Hungarian immigrant. Now, I think this is quite interesting, and that they both give each other a look, as if to say, we've just been talking about being in a particular type of Catholic club. Well, these two are in another club. These two are in the immigrant club. And it's one giving a look to the other. Do either want to engage? They're both trying to assimilate. One owns a pork butcher's. The other is the son of an immigrant and feels pretty, as we'll get to know Bloom, feels pretty at home in Dublin, doesn't want to be anywhere else. He's certainly not thinking about emigrating to Palestine or anything like that. So it's a look that says, I think, that says, yeah, I know you are. Yeah, we neither of us want to go there, so we won't. Whether that's a mutual feeling or unilateral, one side or the other, Bloom thinks no, better not. I think it's about that, and I think that's a pretty subtle recognition on Joyce's part, if that's what he's got. But I think any immigrant or anyone of an immigrant family anywhere in the world would know that feeling. Okay, he's now walking. He's been served. He's got his kidney. He's walking home. He hasn't got swinging hips to look at, but he occupies himself by reading this bit of paper that he's picked up. It's clearly about Zionism, Judaism, Jewishness, all of which is going to form a pretty important part of our book. Not everyone is interested in that these days. It's not so fashionable to think about Zionism, but we are going to have to consider that. If you want to get to grips with this book, you're going to have to understand it and understand why Joyce is using it and what it means for the reader and for Bloom in the context of our story. But we can't just ignore it. Anyway, maybe that's not for now. Okay. So you've got the paragraph about the oranges, the immense melon fields north of Jaffa, and all that. And it seems to be promulgated by this Agendat Natayim Planters Company. It's some sort of commercial scheme inviting people to invest in it, ideally to come out and settle, but if not, support it commercially. And what they get for that is a share of the crop and a return on their investment. Bloom thinks about it, and he ultimately thinks, no, nothing doing, not for me. But he says, but still, there's an idea behind it. So he doesn't reject it entirely, but he doesn't think it's for him. Now, this isn't about, on the face of it, it's about Israel-Palestine. But what is it about in the context of our book? What is Bloom's promised land? Yes, he will learn that he's not technically Jewish, but he's been brought up to feel Jewish by his father, and therefore Zionism is going to be something ingrained in him, of interest to him. Since the expulsion by the Romans from biblical Israel, it's in every prayer, every commentary, pretty much, about the return. All of the, the Psalms, it just is. So, but what does it mean in the context of someone who feels predominantly a Dubliner and Irish? And I think that as we go through the book, we will realise that Bloom's promised land is not a foreign land thousands and thousands of miles away. It is 7 Eccles Street, and in particular it's his marriage bed where his wife lies, and where we will learn in a few lines' time that she may well be unfaithful to him that afternoon. And his promised land is his marriage, and that's what he needs to sort out, and it will correlate through the book with Zionist thinking and usurpation, being expelled from the land, returning from the land, how that will also correlate with the Irish struggle. Important themes in the book, but for Bloom personally, when he thinks about immense melon fields, and remember also that Stephen had a dream about an Oriental man holding up a melon, a creamy fruit. We may have established Bloom as a bit of a bottom man. He likes those hips swinging. These enormous melons might come to be associated with a part of the female anatomy. But anyway, we'll just play with that idea as we go through the book. So I'm continuing on page 72, and as he's thinking about Jews and Israel and how that's been discussed, he thinks about earlier in his marriage when they lived in around St Kevin's Parade off of Clanbrassil Street, and it was known at that time as Little Jerusalem. It was where most, there wasn't a big Jewish community in Dublin, but those that did tended to live together, as say in the area known as Little Jerusalem, colloquially. He thinks of their old friends there, the Mastianskis, the Citrons, the chats that they it seems to be fairly happy times early in his marriage. Right. So, yeah, and he thinks about a lemon fruit, a bit of lemon. I could go off to a tangent there about how fruit being expensive, but I won't. But anyway, he liked the smell of the fruit, and in the next chapter, he will buy a bar of soap that he's going to keep on him all day, and it smells of lemon, of citrus. Okay, maybe let's talk about these high prices. So there's a comment that they fetched high prices, Moisel told me. The fruit fetched high price. That's at the top of page 73. It is interesting, and it exemplifies a broader point that I think I made in my introductory video, that how there's something for everyone in this book. And people think you need to be very, very clever to read this book, and it's not necessarily the case. If you happen to have been brought up in a certain way, in this case, Jewish, but it might be, the horse racing business or the newspaper business or the pub business, these professors in their academic ivory towers have studied this meticulously, but they weren't brought up with it. So, and many commentators have thought about this, about how the fruit fetches high prices. And they said, well, yes, fruit was very expensive in those days. That's not what Joyce is talking about at all. It's not what Bloom is thinking about. If one isn't Jewish, one just glosses over that. It's not to do with about how fruit came from a long way away and command high prices. Our answer, what is confirmed a couple of lines further down, that must be without a flaw, confirms to us what we're talking about here is not any old fruit. We are talking about an etrog. An etrog is a ceremonial fruit used in the festival of Tabernacles, Sukkot. Comes just after Yom Kippur. It's sort of a large lemon, and it can only be used ceremoniously if it is absolutely flawless. So around that time of year, of September, they are very, very expensive, because you can't just use a lemon. It's got to be a particular type of lemon. And if it's got any scratch, any blemish at all, then it can't be used. So they do command pretty high prices. So it's quite interesting that Joyce throwing that in there, he throws something in that only a pretty small segment of his readership are going to have any interest in or pick up. And it makes one think that there's an awful lot in this book that I am not getting, because another quip will be so narrow in its appeal. It's very hard simply to research it and find out. You need to grow up in that world. And it's quite very impressive that Joyce should get to grips with such narrowness. And anyway, making that. Okay, so the next bit of significance, I think, is that a cloud begins to cover the sun. Holy, slowly, holy. Now, we might want to compare a similar event with Stephen. The clock has obviously wound back. We're back at 8 a.m. in the beginning of Calypso. So we're back with Stephen in the Martello Tower. And now let's say it's 8:30 or something like that, or 8:15. So Stephen was looking out over Dublin Bay. He also sees a cloud. It's the same cloud. And that altered his mood. He was never terribly upbeat anyway, but the cloud comes over and he is then suddenly briefly in the shade. And I think then he recalls his mother coming to him in a dream with the wet ashes on her breath. So now let's contrast Bloom's description of the early kibbutz on page, what would it be, around page 72, when he was walking in the sun. And there was these immense orange groves, immense melon fields, and sunny. But now his mood has changed. He's now extremely downbeat as he's thinking on really the same sort of stuff. Now it's very, very miserable. The oldest people wandered. So we have a wandering Jew thing. The paragraph that begins on page 73 with not like that, a barren land, bare waste, and then it gets into volcanic, Dead Sea, no fish, no nothing. So, right. And the fact that he's thinking, so this wandering Jew type theme, he's thinking about this far off place. And what does he talk about? It bore the oldest, the first race. So a people that have been wandering far away over the earth, homeless, captivity to captivity, multiplying, dying, being born everywhere except in their Jewish homeland. And then this analogy and the profanity that he comes out with to an old woman's reproductive regions, that a reproductive system that doesn't work anymore. Desolation, grey horror, seared his flesh. All because he's in the shade now. Completely changed his mood. So it's sort of implying that he's warm-blooded. Then as soon as he's out of the sun, his mood changes quite quickly. As he turns into Eccles Street, cold oil slid along his veins, chilling his blood. But then he thinks stoically, well, I'm here now. He can almost feel, imagine the warmth of Molly giving him succour again. He puts it down to morning mouth, bad images. He's gone out. He hasn't had his breakfast yet. He hasn't had his cup of tea. He got up wrong side of the bed, didn't do exercises, must do the exercises that he's got that book for. We'll talk about that book, touch upon it occasionally as we go through the book. He looks at some of at his neighbouring houses, blotchy brown, a few to let. There's some estate agent signs. He notices different estate agents, quite famous, well-known as now. We look around a London street, you'll see the same signs. Then it was Towers, Battersby North, MacArthur. And then, yes, as I said, he thinks back to Molly and of his bed, his promised land, warmed, be near her, ample, bed warmed, flesh, yes, yes. So 2 very positive words there, important words in our book, and yes. And he cheers up again. He thinks of his daughter. He imagines his daughter now aged 15 and moved away, but he thinks of her as a young girl. He remembers her running running up Eccles Street as she runs to meet me, a girl with gold hair on the wind. Is there a blue ribbon in her hair? Does he mention that? Can't think. I think there is a reference to blue somewhere. Maybe not. Got slim sandals. She runs to meet me, a girl with gold hair on the wind. So this is young Millie Bloom, as she was, we're guessing, when she was about 5 or 6 years old. Okay, he's home. He opens the door. Remember, it wasn't locked because he didn't have a key. So he's pushed it too. Pushes it open, and he sees 2 letters and a card on the floor, on the hall floor, the postman's bin. He picks them up. One is a letter. There's a letter for him, and a card for Molly, and a letter for Molly. And the letter for Molly is addressed to Mrs. Marion Bloom. And just as with the cloud, this changes his mood. His quick heart slowed at once. Bold hand, Mrs. Marion. So we might not think, obviously Marion is Molly's proper name. We might not think there's anything much in that, but in 1904, if you wanted to write to Bloom's wife, Molly, you would write to Mrs. Leopold Bloom. Now, the author of this letter has written to her as Mrs. Marion Bloom. This is bold indeed, and it's conveying a message, but in doing so, either to the husband or the wife or to both. It's saying, don't particularly, in an extremely sexist way, a wife was considered the property of the husband. I don't know whether legally in 1904, but certainly that was the general feel. That's the derivation of that word. So this is someone saying, I don't care much for that. I'm writing to her, not to you, not as something of yours, to Mrs. Marion Bloom. Anyway, Molly cries down. She's still in her bed. Poldy! He goes up. He enters the room, and I think we've got he enters the room. This is page 74. It's reasonably clear. The next bit, she asks who the letters are for, and he explains, well, there's a letter to me from Millie, their daughter, who was 15 yesterday and moved away to Mullingar to take a job, and a letter. She didn't move away yesterday. She turned 15 yesterday. She's been away, I get the impression, for several months. Let's say about a month. A letter for Molly and a card for Molly. He asks her, do you want the blind up? Yes. But as he's pulling the blind up, sort of Venetian blind, he gives a sideways look back at her, glances behind, and he notices that she puts the letter under the pillow. And then she reads the card. And then he goes down to make her tea. She calls down to him after him about remember to scorch the teapot. So we might get the impression, it's the second time she's called down the stairs, that he's slightly henpecked. And he goes down, he's making the tea, he's careful how much tea to put in, he wants to, make her a nice breakfast. The cat mews hungrily against him. He thinks, they say they won't eat pork, kosher. He sort of half jokes to himself. So again, we know he's got this, he knows a little bit about Agendat Nataim and these early Zionist settlements. He knew the name Moses Montefiore. One assumes, I thought he was dead. So we're establishing there's something Jewish about Bloom. He knows about this stuff. And now he's talked about them being kosher. So about cats, don't touch pork. I think that's a load of rubbish, but he thinks it. We'll learn that Bloom thinks a lot of things that aren't necessarily accurate. They're often in the right ballpark, but he doesn't know. He's a bit of a thinker, but not a perfect thinker, by no means. So, yeah. Okay, so that's just a bit of character development there. He puts the kidney in the pan, puts in some pepper from the chipped egg cup and lets it all sizzle. And he goes and he opens his letter. He knows it's from Millie. He recognises the handwriting. And just as Stephen did with Garrett Deese's letter, that won't be at quite the same time, I don't think. That will be 10:30. There, this is no, that'll be slightly later in the morning. This corresponds more with the Martello Tower time and the 40-foot. But anyway, like Stephen did then, Bloom scans the letter from Millie, and he has a cup called a moustache cup, which we'll learn a little bit about, but let's move on for now. He has very fond thoughts about his daughter, about Millie Bloom. He remembers that she made up a little rhyme. He's thinking about the little song she sang, and thinking about back when she was younger. Right. Is there a slightly unsavoury thought when he thinks about the reference to Professor Goodwin and to Millie, sex breaking out even then? So we know now she's 15. We don't know what age he's thinking back to her, but around the time of puberty, and she seems to be an early developer. We might correlate that with Molly much, much later in the book. But now we'll just park it. We don't think this is Bloom being pervy. It's an observation on his daughter. Okay. But the fact that Millie has become sexually aware will be of concern for Bloom. We'll get into that shortly. But for now, he's made the breakfast and he takes it up on the tray. When he gets into the room, she's not particularly nice to him, Molly. She says, "Oh, what a time you were," she says. He notices there's a strip of torn envelope that peeps out from under the pillow, so it seems she's read the letter. He asks her who was the letter from. He thinks bold hand, Mrs. Marion, and it turns out it's from someone called Boylan, Blazes Boylan. And she says he's coming round later. He's bringing the programme. We don't know precisely when, other than later. We don't know for what, but we'll piece that together as we read on. Bloom asks, "What are you singing?" And it turns out she's singing two songs. A duet, Lachi Darem, with J.C. Doyle, a well-known tenor at the time. Lachi Darem is from Don Giovanni. It's actually the music I use to introduce these videos. And so she's singing that. She's also singing another song on her own, which is Love's Old Sweet Song. So Molly is a soprano, a singer. It seems sort of semi-professionally because he's bringing the programme. So it's some sort of concert setup. Molly's doing a couple of numbers, and we get the impression that Boylan is part of the organisation of the concert. We'd be right. He's sort of an impresario, among other things. Molly asks Bloom, what time is the funeral? Right. There'll be a funeral that day. He thinks it's 11, but he needs to check the newspaper to get the exact time. So then she's got her mouth full. She's eating her breakfast, but she's gesturing to him to pick something up. He thinks it might be her underwear or her clothes from yesterday. But no, it's a book. He looks around, can't see it. No, it must have fallen down. He sort of feels round under the bed. And as he's doing it, he's thinking, Volio or, Vorey, is it? I want, but I don't want. And this is a line from Don Giovanni, from Laci Durem, which he's misremembering. But he wants her to get the pronunciation right. Molly doesn't speak Italian. This will be quite an important piece of information for much, much later in the book. But singing well in Italian and pronouncing the Italian correctly is an important thing for a soprano who sings operatic songs. So Bloom is not quite getting those words right, which we can talk about at one point, perhaps today or whatever. I'm not sure, maybe in a future video. But anyway, Molly's been reading a book and she's finished it and it's dropped down somewhere by the bed. And there's a word in it she didn't understand. And she says, I want to show you this word. Find the book. It's down there somewhere. And there he finds it. And it's next to the chamber pot. It's an orange keyed chamber pot. So maybe some sort of allusion to classical Greece. And the word, what is the word? She wants to know what it means. It turns out it's metempsychosis. Originally a Greek word, so back to Odysseus and Homer. And Bloom explains that it means the migration of souls. And Molly doesn't really know what the hell he's talking about. She says, Rux, tell us in plain words. And then he looks into her eyes. He recalls the same eyes, the same young eyes when they first met. They played charades in Dolphin's Barn, an area in Dublin. And if Millie is 15, she was 15 yesterday, so we're talking about some 16 years ago or so when Molly and Bloom first meet. And the book turns out to be called Ruby, the Pride of the Ring. And I wouldn't call it soft porn, but it's a vaguely erotic sort of book, vaguely sadomasochistic. And it's set in a circus. And there on the front page, I think there's a picture. It's the ringmaster, and he's there. He's called Maffei. And at his cowering at his foot, he's there with a whip, holding a whip, and cowering at his feet is a woman, sort of naked woman, but holding a sheet, covering herself. We presume this is Ruby. She's cowering underneath him, and he's very aggressive with the whip. And Bloom thinks about circuses generally and about how families breed kids to become trapeze artists. Anyway, we've had an introduction. He's explained metempsychosis. We might know it better as reincarnation. Our book might be about the reincarnated Odysseus into Leopold Bloom, the reincarnated Penelope into Molly Bloom, reincarnated Telemachus into Stephen Dedalus. Who knows? It's a theme that is now introduced. So she's finished that book. She'd like him to get another one. And she says, I quite like this author, Paul de Kock, because apart from anything else, she likes his name. And she likes the sort of erotic stuff that he writes. So, they then have this discussion about reincarnation and all that, just talking about So maybe now, do we think about also a reincarnated Calypso? If that's what Joyce suggested this episode should be called, well, who's Calypso? Calypso, this witch that traps Odysseus for many years, for nearly a decade. Well, the Blooms have been married for a bit more than a decade, but is Bloom trapped? Is Molly Calypso? Must be Molly, is what we are thinking. She's given the impression she's a little domineering and henpecking. He's brought her breakfast in bed. She's told him not to scold, or she's told him he must scold the kettle. Right. So, just that bit more on the background. Calypso's island is Ogygia. But there's some sort of relationship with Calpe. Was it also the island called Calpe? Anyway, there's a link between Calypso's island with Calpe, sounds a bit like Calypso, which is modern Gibraltar, and that is where Molly was born. So we've got a number of synergies between Molly and Calypso, so we are thinking that is our correspondence in this episode. Molly is Calypso, wherever that goes. And Calypso, but we also thought that Molly was Penelope. Penelope was faithful. Calypso had sex with Odysseus every day for 7 years. Calypso had sex with Odysseus, yes, who wasn't her husband, so out of marriage, had sex every day for 7 years. So as the analogy doesn't quite work, but also we've got double standards between the expectation that Penelope stays faithful, whereas Odysseus having sex every day for 7 years with someone that wasn't his wife. Not really criticised for that. One might say, well, he was compelled to do that. Yeah, right. Or one might just say double standards. Okay. But then she's still not getting what metempsychosis means, and Bloom thinks, well, I'll give her an example. And he looks above their bed is a picture of a classical Greek nymph. Maybe that is Calypso. We don't know. But he thinks I'll use that by way of an example. He's got this picture because it was advertised in this magazine, a periodical called Photo Bits. You could send off for it, buy it, pay a bit extra for the frame. And Molly thought it would look nice hanging above the bed, and so Bloom buys it. There it is. So we've got this picture of a Greek nymph above the marriage bed. And Bloom uses her to explain, well, she might have been reincarnated. Her soul, the soul that was in her, may have been used other vessels, other human vessels for the same soul through history. Well, whether this explains it properly to Molly or not, we don't know, because she suddenly smells burning. And he thinks, oh my God, it's the kidney. And maybe maybe resonates with Calypso, who makes a burnt offering in the Odyssey. But anyway, Bloom runs down. Sure enough, the kidney is beginning to burn, but he's saved it. He just cuts off the burnt bit and gives that to the cat. So he does find something to feed the cat with, and then leaves Molly to have her breakfast. And he's downstairs and he's going to eat his kidney and have his tea. And while he does that, he reads the letter from Millie. Now we're on page 79. So before that, he just skimmed it. Now he's going to read it properly. So she turned 15 yesterday. And even though she's only 15, the letter gives Bloom cause for concern because she's out in Mullingar. So Mullingar's pretty much in the centre of Ireland, which has got to make it, I don't know, 50 miles from Dublin, maybe more, far away from father's protection. And he's already commented just before about sex was breaking out even then when he was thinking of her as maybe a 12-year-old. So and we will learn that Molly sexually matured pretty early. So it stands to reason that Millie may follow in the same suit. And lo and behold, in the letter, there's a reference to a young student who comes here some evenings, and his name is Bannon. Do you remember when Mulligan was about to jump into the 40-foot, into the bathing area? And there's someone in there who asks about Mulligan's brother, and he says, no, the brother's not here. He's out with Bannon in Mullingar. He's got some sort of girlfriend there, i.e. not Mulligan's brother, but this bloke, Bannon. He's got a girlfriend there. He calls her Photobit or something, because she works in a photographic shop. And it turns out this is Millie. And by photographic shop, we're not quite sure. Yeah, people would go in, they would have their photographs taken, but also semi-associated with maybe erotica. Was Millie having a photograph taken? Where were those photographs then being published? There is some history in Bloom's family. His father's brother or his father's cousin had an atelier, a photographic shop back in Szombathely, where they lived in Hungary, or maybe in another European city. But so there's some sort of family tradition for that. But Bloom is not wild about that. That's where she's working, that she's so far away from home, and that there's mention of a reference to this young student comes over some evenings named Bannon. They sing. What do they do when he comes over? They sing songs. And one of the songs they sing is a song called Seaside Girls, which you go onto Spotify or whatever, and you'll look at iTunes, you'll be able to find it and listen to what it's, listen to how it sounds. And she says, Boylan's Seaside Girls. She says, I was about to say Blazes Boylan. This is quite a lot of artistic license being taken by Joyce. So in this book, this song Seaside Girls is credited to someone with the surname Boylan. In real life, that's not the case, but it's assumed so for artistic purposes in the book. And she makes the point, he was singing Seaside, but it was Boylan's Seaside Girls. I nearly mixed it up with Blazes Boylan for two reasons. One, obviously same name. Two, Blazes Boylan sings that song. And it shows that Blazes Boylan is not just coming around that afternoon to see Molly, but he's become a bit of a friend of the family. Millie has got to know him reasonably well. So if Bloom was concerned about Boylan and his wife, the fact that Boylan also has some sort of connection with his now potentially sexually active daughter, this really does make his blood run a bit cold, as I think it says at some point. Okay, so I think we're on about page 80, aren't we? He thinks about 15 yesterday, curious, 15th of the month, 2. As obviously yesterday was the 15th. Her first birthday away from home. So it shows she's been away for some weeks or months, but definitely not more than a year. That would have made her very young. And he's separated from her, which saddens him. He thinks back to when she was born to Mrs. Thornton, the midwife in Denzil Street, who's helped a lot of babies into the world. That makes him think about poor little Rudy, their son. She knew straight away from his purple face or whatever it was that he wasn't going to last. And poor Rudy struggles for 11 days and then dies. And Bloom thinks, well, had he lived, he would be 11 years old now. Is number 11, perhaps not for now, next chapter, we'll think about what it might mean, has some significance. He then thinks more about Millie and how maybe she's better off away from Dublin, where, there's concerns about Mullingar, but at least there's not loads and loads of boys at her like there would be in Dublin. Even though she's not got her father there to protect her. And over the next couple of paragraphs, the top of page 81, it becomes a little hard to work out whether he's thinking about Millie or Molly. And they become conflated, and as does his sense of impotency and powerlessness. He's powerless to prevent Millie having a boyfriend out in Mullingar. Is he also powerless to prevent Molly having an affair with Blazes Boylan? And he's powerless to prevent Millie maturing into a young woman with the potential and the inevitability that she will lose her virginity at some point. Hopefully not too soon. Hopefully it hasn't already happened, but it's going to happen. It's destiny. And is it also inevitable that his wife will have an affair with Boylan? And he's almost paralysed as he's sat there in his chair with the blood running cold in his veins. And this song, Seaside Girls, the one that they were singing down in Mullingar, the one that Boylan sung with them as a family. This is also, it almost comes to symbolise the corruption of nasty men tempting women. Perhaps older men and younger girls. Don Giovanni with, what was her name in when they sing the duet together, Lachi Durem. All the same thing. For those two, read Blazes Boylan and Molly / Millie. So towards the bottom of that page, he thinks of Molly lying upstairs now, Mrs. Marion, reading, lying back, counting the strands of her hair, smiling, braiding as she reads the letter from Boylan. He thinks, will happen too. He felt the flowing qualm spread over him, useless to move now. Lips kissed, kissed, full, gluey woman's lips. Does it remind us of Stephen's poetry, mouth-to-mouth kiss, the line that he came up with? It didn't sound like very good poetry, but he felt it was a line. It was something to work with. It makes Bloom think, well, maybe I should go and see Millie. I'll go out to Mullingar. I could work a pass with McCoy. The cat then crosses his path again. She's cleaned all the fur. He wonders if there's a hint of rain in the air because the cat was doing something in front of the fire. He thinks that might be a portent of rain and thunder in the air. Was the cat washing her ear with her back to the fire? Anyway, he's eaten the offal, the kidney. Now that he's eaten, those bodily organs, his own bodily organs, begin to stir into action, and he feels a heaviness in his bowels. This is a book of reality, and we're going to get a description of a man doing his morning toilet. But he likes to read at stall. So he goes to the parlour and he gets an old copy of Titbits. Titbits was the weekly or monthly periodical sort of collection of short stories. In fact, I'll pause for a second, and I'm now back, and I've paused because I went to fetch my copy of Titbits. There we are. So one of my previous groups terribly kindly sought out this copy here. This is from, does it say the date? All right. Week ending 5th September 1959. My God, it's even older than me by about a month. And you can see it's not an erotic thing, but sort of lurid. And just opening it at a random page. So I don't know what it was like in 1904, but anyway, that's what it looked like in 1959. So thought it was worthwhile just dredging that up. So there we are. It's in 1904. It printed short stories, and some of which were sent in by readers. And if they were printed, they got paid by the column. And this rather interests Bloom. But he can't be. So he's got his newspaper, Titbits, but he can't be bothered to go upstairs. So indicating they've got an inside toilet, which puts them at a certain status in society. He is downstairs in sort of lower ground, the kitchen. The house sort of slopes slightly. From the front, it would be lower ground, but at the back, it goes out into the garden. And out in the garden is something called the Jakes, the outside toilet. That's where he's going to go. And as he's going out there, he thinks about fertilizing the garden before he gets on with his own fertilization, and the sort of way that the garden could be transformed. And garden representing domesticity. This is his kingdom. We think about the usurpation of Stephen from the Martello Tower. Well, a man is coming into his house that afternoon, into his marriage bed. I think gardens are an important part of one's world, and particularly one's domestic world, where one grows things. One grows things in one's own image. One produces family in this house and garden. So I think there's some symbolic, in my mind, something symbolic about the garden and him thinking about how it could be transformed and fertilized, which he needs to do. He needs to do something about his domestic situation. He needs to transform it. Right. He is then reminded that 2 weeks before, on Whit Monday, he was sat in his garden and he was stung by a bee. Will have some relevance to our story. I'm going to make the case that actually has crucial relevance to our story, but that's for many episodes' time. He wonders where his hat is. Did he put it back on the peg? And he rethinks as he came into the house. He saw the letters on the floor, that which rather knocked him off his stride when he saw Mrs. Marion Bloom, because he is going to need his hat to go out. There's this funeral we've heard talk about. He's got to go out. He thinks about the butcher again, Lugach, and Agendat Nataim, and he thinks now my miss, the way he addressed the other girl ahead of him. Enthusiast. That word is quite interesting. um, it might be indicative of how Joyce thought of the real Moses Lugach. Anyway, I don't think I need it. Was it a slightly derogatory term back then? I think we might say he was an avid enthusiast for Jewish return to Israel. It may be an indication that Bloom is not on that page as we speak. Right, he goes into the Jakes. He takes the opportunity while he's doing that to see if that girl, if the slavey from next door is out at the back of their house whacking any carpets. But sadly for Bloom, she isn't. So he sits down, he starts reading the story, and it's called Matcham's Masterstroke, written by a chap called Mr. Philip Beaufoy. And he learns that Philip Beaufoy has been paid £3.13 and 6 because Bloom, having seen what they pay per column, he's counted the columns and the paragraphs, and he works out that's what this bloke has been paid. And he thinks, I could do something like that. Maybe even jointly with Molly. She comes out with some funny stuff, particularly while she's getting dressed or undressed, nattering away. And it will sort of be a diary of Eccles Street. We then get a rather interesting literary technique going on, probably may well be unique in literary history, where the double entendres on the one hand are describing Bloom's process of defecation, but at the same time describing his thoughts on the quality of the writing that he's reading. And one might say Bloom feels they are of a similar standard. So, he thinks about Molly's funny sayings. There's one interesting bit that I feel I ought to point out. She says about, did Roberts pay you yet? So in real life, it looks like this may well be George Roberts, who was the editor or publisher of Dubliners. And it took Joyce years to get Dubliners published. And this Roberts, he was in with him, then he fell out with him, and there was lots of pressure on Joyce to change Dubliners, to remove this story, to tweak that story, and Joyce was refusing to do it. So he's sort of having a bit of a dig at George Roberts here. And another Dubliners reference, next line, what did Greta Conroy, there's some reference to Greta Conroy, wasn't there, about how she was dressed? So we recall Greta Conroy from The Dead in Dubliners, where she is the central character of that story. We have quite a, what page would this be on? Quite a reference to Ponchielli's Dance of the Hours. Must be getting pretty near the end of the book. Yeah, so we're at the bottom of page 84 and on to page 85, where this, not near the end of the book, near the end of this episode, where this ends. So rubbing smart, so he's thinking about, as she was getting either dressed or undressed, this would be undressed after an evening. And during that evening, it was from a few weeks before, rubbing smartly in turn, each welt against her stocking calf. Morning after the bazaar dance, when May's band played Ponchielli's Dance of the Hours. You may know Hello Mother, Hello Father, the Alan Sherman song. That's a parody of this Dance of the Hours. and it's a little ballet sequence in the middle of the opera La Gioconda, and it goes through the different frames of the day. So dawn, midday, dusk, nighttime, and the significance of that little piece of music will become more apparent at different aspects of the book. But it sort of that night when that music was played, I think was the night that that Boylan, as far as Molly is concerned, becomes a little bit more than a family friend. Something goes on at that dance, and things are set in motion that may come to fulfillment this afternoon when Boylan comes round with the programme. And no spoilers, I don't think, but Bloom is not going to be there then. He is going to be keeping out of the way. We then get a funny bit in the book in that he's also brought in this old copy of Titbits because that's his toilet paper. So this article, this story that he's read, Matcham's Masterstroke, which has a reference, I think, to the Laughing Witch. We might think of Calypso. We might think there's some allusion to Blake at the end of the Garden of Eden bit where they walk off, or is it Milton's Paradise Lost? They walk off hand in hand. So there's some sort of vague allusion to maybe Bloom and Molly, maybe Boylan and Molly. Anyway, he rips it off and uses it to wipe his bottom, and then is concerned about are his trousers dirty and from the outside toilet because he's got to go. He's wearing them to this funeral. Has he got time? He wonders for a bath beforehand. He gets told the time. Because the bell. He hears the bells from St George's at the court at the top of the road, and my guess is that that shows it's about 8:45, and he thinks poor Dignam, who is the person that's going to be buried. And we finish with the sound of the church bells. Hey ho, hey ho. Okay, so that is the end of Calypso. We have met Leopold Bloom. We have met Molly Bloom. We'll get to know Leopold very, very well over the next 12 episodes and more. We will hear about Molly during that time, but we won't hear from Molly until the very last episode, Penelope. We've had a chance to think about Calypso. Why is it called Calypso? Who is Calypso? Who has got, if Bloom is Odysseus, Calypso has him trapped. Who has Bloom trapped? The obvious candidate here is Molly, because he's a bit of a henpecked husband. But there's a phrase used quite a lot in this book, and that phrase is retrospective arrangement. Quite often said by a character called Tom Kernan. And what that says to me, how that speaks to me, is that you don't get all you need from this book in the right order in real time. Certain passages you just have to accept you don't understand, but they become clearer later. It's as almost though you need to read the book more than once, because it's only armed with some knowledge that you've picked up from later in the book that you can make sense of the earlier pieces. And we might reach that conclusion. Using that, we might eventually conclude that Calypso is actually the picture of the nymph on the wall that overlooks their marriage bed and has overlooked it for the last decade or so and has had to observe what's been going on in that bedroom. Actually, she's the one that is trapped. She's trapped in that picture frame. So why is it that I'm thinking that she might be the nymph I'm not sure I want to get into that now, but I'll just sort of drop that in. So other things that we've covered the fact that Bloom is comfortable with his bodily functions in comparison to Stephen on the beach, scared of the dead dog, scared of the live dog. Bloom, he talked to the cat. He sat there on the toilet, reads his story. He eats offal. He doesn't mind that it smells a little of urine. In fact, that's one of the aspects he quite likes about it. So we feel that he's a considerate man, that he's empathetic to fellow human beings and also to animals. We've had a correlation with Stephen, both in terms of time, in terms of the effect of the cloud, and as I've said, contrasting Stephen's considerations of bodily things, of washing and bathing. And we've had the whole Jewish thing going on. We've had an economics thing going on, the home economics, the making the house work, civic duty, town planning, that sort of thing. We might also have got the impression he's a little creepy, bit lechy, little bit pervy. But we're in his head. And I'm afraid we all have private thoughts going on in our head, and we'd all be horrified should our private thoughts be written down and splashed all over a book for the world to read and interpret for decades or even a century. So, warm-blooded, likes the sun, empathetic, sense of how the sun affected him. So all sorts of interesting stuff in our first meeting with Bloom. Molly, almost no dialogue at all, but we'll save Molly for much, much later, but we absolutely will get to her and her perspective. And I think that's probably where I can leave matters. Next chapter, Lotus Eaters. We're still getting into the wanderings of Ulysses now. Bloom will be wandering around Dublin, and that's for next time. Looking forward to seeing you then. I'm Russell Raphael from North London Ulysses. Bye-bye.